What if everything you thought you knew about Eve was wrong? Hidden deep in the original Hebrew text of Genesis lies a shocking truth, one that challenges centuries of religious tradition. Was Eve truly created from Adam's rib, or is the story far more mysterious and powerful than we've been told? In this video, we'll uncover ancient meanings lost in translation, explore forgotten interpretations, and reveal what the Hebrew actually says about Eve's creation. Prepare to question what you've been taught, because once you see the truth, there's no going back. This is the real story the translations never told you. The shocking truth about Eve's origin hidden in the Hebrew text. For centuries, the story of Eve, first woman, mother of humanity, partner of Adam, has been retold through translations, filtered by cultural expectations and religious doctrine. But beneath the familiar narrative lies a deeper, often overlooked story embedded in the Hebrew text of Genesis. A closer examination of the original language reveals that Eve's origin, identity, and role are far more complex and perhaps more empowering than traditionally taught. What if Eve wasn't created merely as a helper or subordinate, but as a figure of equal status or even divine mystery? The Hebrew text holds secrets that have been obscured for millennia. This essay will unpack the Hebrew terms, analyze their implications, and explore how translations and interpretations have veiled Eve's true origin. 1. The traditional story of Eve. In mainstream Christian and Jewish teachings, Eve is described as the first woman created by God from Adam's rib to be his helper. This narrative is primarily based on Genesis 2 verses 18 to 24, which describes the creation of Eve as a divine response to Adam's loneliness. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him." Genesis 2 verse 18, ESV. Later, God causes Adam to sleep, removes one of his ribs, and creates Eve from it. Adam names her woman, Isha, because she was taken out of man, Ish. But this version of the story is layered over a complex and nuanced Hebrew narrative. Let's peel back the translation to see what the original text may have truly intended. 2. The Hebrew word Selah. Was it really a rib? One of the most misunderstood elements of the Genesis story is the term translated as rib. In Genesis 2 verse 21, we read, "And he took one of his ribs, Hebrew, Selah, and closed up the flesh instead thereof." The Hebrew word here, Selah, is traditionally translated as rib. But this word is used elsewhere in the Bible nearly 40 times, and it never means rib in any of those cases. It refers to the side of something, a building, an altar, or even a mountain. For example, Exodus 26 verse 20, the second side, Selah, of the tabernacle. 1 Kings 6 verse 5, against the wall of the house, he built stories round about on the sides, Selot, of the house. So why was it translated as rib in Genesis? Some scholars argue this was a theological choice made to support a narrative of woman as derivative from man, rather than as an equal or original creation. If Selah means side, then Eve may have been created not from a rib, but from one entire side of Adam's body, possibly implying an original androgynous human that God divided into two beings, man and woman. 3. Androgyny in ancient interpretations. This idea isn't new. The ancient Jewish text Genesis Rabbah, a rabbinic commentary, includes the view that Adam was originally a bisexual or androgynous being. Rabbi Jeremiah ben Eliezer said, "When the Holy One, blessed be He, created the first man, He created him with two faces and then split him." Genesis Rabbah 8:1. This supports the idea that the first human was a unified being embodying both male and female characteristics. God then separated them into two beings, not that Eve was a lesser or secondary creation. This reading radically challenges the assumption of male primacy in the creation order. Plato also echoed this in his Dialogue Symposium, where Aristophanes tells a myth that humans were once dual beings, male and female joined, and were split by the gods. 4. The name Eve, what does it really mean? In Genesis 3 verse 20, Adam names the woman Eve. The man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. The Hebrew name is Chava or Hava, which comes from the root chaya, meaning to live. Her name, therefore, connects her intrinsically to life, not sin or temptation. However, some scholars note that Chava closely resembles an earlier Semitic name for a goddess of life and fertility, possibly linked to Ashera or Inanna. This connection suggests that Eve's character may have originated or absorbed traits from ancient Near Eastern fertility goddesses. This complicates the simple narrative of Eve as merely a helper. Instead, her name may suggest a link to divine power and creation, a life-giver rather than a passive creation. 5. Ezer Kenegdo, a helper or an equal. Genesis 2 verse 18 introduces Eve with a phrase often translated as a helper fit for him. But the Hebrew term used here is Ezer Kenegdo. Ezer means helper, but it is not a subordinate role. The word is used over a dozen times in the Hebrew Bible to describe God as the helper of Israel, e.g., Psalm 121 verses 1-2. Kenegdo means corresponding to him, facing him, or equal to him. Thus, Ezer Kenegdo could be more accurately rendered as a powerful help equal to him or a counterpart facing him. This redefinition dramatically alters the perceived power dynamic between Adam and Eve. Eve is not a secondary or lesser being, but a co-equal, possibly even a divine-like aid in the narrative of human partnership and purpose. 6. The double creation story. Another important detail often overlooked is that Genesis contains two creation accounts. Genesis 1 verses 26-27. Male and female are created simultaneously in God's image. Genesis 2 verses 18-24. The woman is formed from man's side. In Genesis 1. So God created man in his own image, male and female he created them. There's no hierarchy or sequence, both are created together, equally, in the image of God. This contradicts the second version, suggesting the second account might be a different tradition or myth layered onto the first. Some scholars, such as those from the documentary hypothesis, suggest Genesis 1 was written by the priestly source, P, while Genesis 2-3 comes from the Yahweh source, J, a more anthropomorphic and story-driven tradition. Understanding this helps explain the different tones and theological implications. 7. The serpent, the tree, and the blame. Much of Eve's later reputation stems from the story in Genesis 3, where she eats from the tree of knowledge after being tempted by the serpent. Traditionally, this has been interpreted as proof of her weakness, disobedience, and origin of sin. However, let's examine this narrative through the lens of Hebrew nuance. Nowhere does the Hebrew text say the serpent is Satan. That association came much later in Christian interpretation. The Hebrew word for crafty or subtle, aram, used to describe the serpent is not inherently negative. It can mean clever or wise. Eve never disobeyed a command directly given to her. God gives the command not to eat the fruit to Adam before Eve is created. Whether Adam properly conveyed it is never confirmed. Moreover, after both eat the fruit, God questions both, and both are punished. Yet only Eve has borne the historical blame, often unjustly, especially given the linguistic and textual ambiguities. 9. Was Eve the first human? A radical possibility. Some scholars propose an even more radical theory, that Eve, or a female figure like her, may have been part of the first human in Genesis 1, and that the Adam-Eve split in Genesis 2 was a symbolic division of spiritual and physical natures or masculine and feminine aspects of one being. The Kabbalistic tradition also reflects this. In the Zohar, a central mystical Jewish text, it is suggested that Adam was originally created as male and female in one, echoing Genesis 1 verse 27. This mystical view aligns with ancient myths of cosmic duality, where creation arises from the separation of unified forces. In this light, Eve isn't just a woman. She represents a cosmic principle of life, wisdom, and spiritual balance. The hidden power of Eve. When read in its original Hebrew and contextualized within ancient literature and theology, the story of Eve becomes far more than a tale of temptation and sin. It is a richly layered narrative that reveals Eve as an equal, a life-giver, and possibly even a symbol of divine mystery. She is not merely a helper in the modern sense, but an ezer kenegdo, a powerful counterpart to Adam. She was not made from a rib, but perhaps from a whole side, suggesting the splitting of a dual human. Her name echoes ancient goddesses and ties her to the sacred act of creation. And the story of her fall may be less about sin, and more about awakening, knowledge, and the complexities of human consciousness. The shocking truth is not that Eve was flawed, but that her strength and equality have been buried beneath centuries of mistranslation, doctrine, and cultural bias. By returning to the Hebrew roots of the text, we rediscover a version of Eve that is wise, powerful, and fully human, and perhaps, in some way, divine. The traditional story of Eve. The story of Eve is one of the foundational narratives in the Judeo-Christian tradition. She is known as the first woman, created by God as a companion to the first man, Adam. Her story is primarily told in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and has shaped countless religious, social, and cultural discussions throughout history. From her creation to her role in the fall of humanity, Eve's story has been interpreted as both a warning and a mirror of human nature, particularly in discussions of temptation, disobedience, sin, and gender roles. This essay explores the traditional story of Eve as it appears in Genesis, outlines its main theological and literary elements, and reflects on how the figure of Eve has been understood across time. Creation of Eve, Genesis chapters 1 and 2. The story of Eve is told primarily in Genesis chapters 1 through 3, with two creation accounts offering different perspectives. Genesis 1, male and female created together. In Genesis 1 verses 26 to 27, God creates humanity. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. This version of the creation account emphasizes the simultaneous creation of male and female. The Hebrew word used for man is Adam, a generic term for humanity. This suggests that from the beginning, both genders were made in the image of God, with equal value and spiritual status. Genesis 2, Eve formed from Adam. Genesis 2 presents a more detailed and intimate account. Here, God creates Adam first from the dust of the earth and places him in the Garden of Eden. Adam names the animals, but no suitable helper was found for him, Genesis 2 verse 20. In response, God causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep, and then he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. Genesis 2 verses 21 to 22. When Adam sees her, he proclaims, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Genesis 2 verse 23. In this traditional narrative, Eve is made from Adam's body to be his companion, and the text suggests a kind of relational unity between man and woman. This account has traditionally been interpreted to imply male precedence and female dependence, though many theologians argue that it also expresses unity, intimacy, and mutual need. Eve in the Garden of Eden. After her creation, Eve lives with Adam in the Garden of Eden, a paradise where everything is provided and there is no suffering or death. God gives them only one restriction. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it you will certainly die. Genesis 2 verses 16 to 17. This command is given before Eve is created, leading to debates about whether Eve knew the rule directly from God or only through Adam. The temptation. In Genesis 3, a serpent, described as the most cunning of all animals, approaches Eve and engages her in conversation. Did God really say, "You must not eat from any tree in the garden"? Genesis 3 verse 1. The serpent tells Eve that eating from the forbidden tree will not bring death, but will instead open her eyes, making her like God, knowing good and evil. Tempted by the fruit's appearance and the desire for wisdom, Eve eats the fruit and then gives some to Adam, who also eats. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Genesis 3 verse 7. This moment is traditionally referred to as the fall of man, marking the introduction of sin into the world. It represents a loss of innocence and a disruption in the perfect relationship between humans and God. Confrontation and punishment. After the transgression, God confronts Adam and Eve. Adam blames Eve. "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it." Genesis 3 verse 12. Eve, in turn, blames the serpent. "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Genesis 3 verse 13. God then issues a set of curses or consequences. The serpent is cursed to crawl and eat dust, and enmity is placed between it and the woman's offspring. The woman, Eve, is told, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. With painful labor you will give birth to children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." Genesis 3 verse 16. The man, Adam, is told, "Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life." Genesis 3 verse 17. Adam and Eve are then expelled from Eden, and an angel is placed at its entrance to guard the way to the tree of life. Theological significance. Eve's role in this story has vast theological consequences. Original sin. In Christian theology, particularly as developed by St. Augustine, Eve's disobedience has been linked to the doctrine of original sin. This concept holds that humanity inherited a sinful nature due to Adam and Eve's transgression. Eve's act is seen as the first instance of human rebellion against God's command, and it necessitated divine redemption through Christ. However, it's important to note that Judaism does not share the doctrine of original sin in the same way. While Eve's actions are considered disobedient and lead to a fall from grace, Jewish tradition focuses more on moral choice and personal responsibility than on inherited guilt. Gender and hierarchy. The traditional story has also been used to justify hierarchical relationships between men and women. Eve's creation from Adam, her role as a helper, and her culpability in the fall have often been interpreted as signs of female inferiority or susceptibility to temptation. Early church fathers, such as Tertullian and Augustine, emphasized this aspect, and their writings contributed to centuries of restrictive views on women in religious and societal roles. However, many contemporary scholars argue that these interpretations stem more from later cultural biases than from the Genesis text itself. The text can also be read as emphasizing mutual responsibility, shared punishment, and shared exile. Eve as mother of all living. Despite her role in the fall, Eve is also honored in Genesis 3 verse 20. Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. The Hebrew name Chava, Eve, is related to the word Chaya, meaning life. Thus, Eve is not only the symbol of disobedience but also of fertility, motherhood, and continuity. She is a figure of profound complexity, both the initiator of exile and the bearer of future life. Legacy and cultural interpretations. Eve's story has inspired endless interpretations in literature, art, theology, and philosophy. In art and literature, Eve is often depicted in Renaissance art holding the forbidden fruit, with the serpent coiled around the tree of knowledge. She's shown as beautiful, mysterious, and often dangerous. In John Milton's Paradise Lost, Eve's character is expanded with poetic depth, grappling with knowledge, guilt, and love. In theology, Catholic and Orthodox traditions honor Mary, the mother of Jesus, as the new Eve, a woman who, through obedience, redeems the disobedience of the first woman. Feminist theology reinterprets Eve not as a seductress, but as a seeker of wisdom, challenging the patriarchal structures imposed on the text. In popular culture, Eve continues to appear in films, novels, and debates about gender, morality, and human nature. She embodies questions about authority, autonomy, and the human desire for knowledge. Modern reevaluations. Recent biblical scholarship and feminist readings have led to new ways of understanding Eve. Rather than a temptress, she is viewed as a curious, autonomous agent making a difficult choice. Some scholars argue the serpent's promise that she would gain knowledge was not a lie. Her eyes were indeed opened, and she did gain discernment. The narrative might represent a mythic coming-of-age story, where humanity transitions from innocence to moral awareness. These interpretations challenge traditional doctrines, but also highlight the richness of the Genesis narrative as a reflection of human nature, growth, and transformation. The traditional story of Eve, as told in the book of Genesis, is far more than a tale of sin and punishment. It is a foundational myth that explores human identity, freedom, responsibility, and the consequences of moral choice. Eve is a central figure, complex, symbolic, and deeply human. Her actions lead to exile from paradise, but also to the unfolding of human history, culture, and redemption. Whether seen as a cautionary tale, a theological foundation, or a deeply human narrative, the story of Eve continues to resonate because it captures something essential about the human condition: our longing to understand, our tendency to transgress, and our need to reconcile with the divine. Now that you've seen the hidden layers of Eve's origin in the Hebrew text, what do you believe? The truth is far more complex and empowering than the simplified version we've been taught. If this changed how you see the Genesis story, imagine what else has been lost in translation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss future deep dives into ancient texts and hidden truths. Share your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching, and remember, the oldest stories still have secrets waiting to be uncovered. Stay curious,